The Gospel accounts of Jesus' birth are possibly the most scrutinized accounts in the whole of the Bible. Every year, more articles, videos, even television programs are produced by skeptics which claim that the birth accounts in the Gospels don't fit the history of the time and that the evidence is against the accuracy of those accounts. This video is going to show the skeptics are wrong and that the Gospel accounts of the Nativity of Jesus fit very precisely into the time and place of his birth. So subscribe, click the notify button and the like button, and off we go. So the big problem for the skeptics is they claim that the accounts of Jesus' birth are historically inaccurate. And essentially there are two complaints they make. The first of them is that the census account of Luke doesn't describe anything that could have happened in the Roman Empire, that the Roman censuses weren't arranged like that, and so Luke couldn't have described that census. In fact, they say there wasn't any such census. And the second point is that the governor Quirinius was governor in 6 AD. Herod the Great died in either 4 BC or maybe 1 BC, but certainly before the time when Quirinius was governor of Syria. So when it mentions Quirinius, it doesn't seem to fit the chronology. That's the claim of the skeptics. Let's have a look at what the evidence actually says. Now, what we need to do in order to understand what's happening is to take a look at the way the Roman Empire was run, the history of the time. In fact, the Roman Empire didn't start until just before the birth of Jesus. Before that, we have a republic, not an empire. And the last big figure in that republic is Julius Caesar. He made quite an inroad into increasing the size of the empire. There were possessions all over the place. He was killed, and then there was a period of chaos, wars from different people trying to become the top man in the republic. And finally, this was won by Augustus. And at this point, the empire, as it started 27 BC, was going to be put by Augustus onto a single administrative framework. What Augustus did was he decided to reform the way each of the provinces was governed. He made some of them into senatorial provinces run by the Senate. Some of them were imperial provinces, which he ruled. He was the emperor. He was known as the princeps, but he was really the emperor. And the imperial provinces were the ones with lots of soldiers in. He didn't want them rebelling against him, so he made sure he was in charge and he appointed the generals there. And the third kind of place associated with the empire were the client kings. These were kings put on the throne by Rome and maintained there, but they governed their own kingdoms themselves. As long as they didn't interfere with Rome and they paid up when they needed money, then that was fine. Judea, of course, was a client kingdom at this point. Anyway, among Augustus's reforms was that he decided every province should have a census of some kind. And in his decrees, he says precisely that. So look at the chronology of it. We have a period of chaos. We've got Caesar comes to power here after his wars. You have the death of Caesar. You have a period of chaos. You have a Parthian invasion of the east of the Roman Empire. Everything is chaotic. But finally, Augustus wins. Augustus comes to the throne of emperor, and the empire begins. Herod the Great is a little bit earlier than the start of Augustus, but Herod is an important figure in the narratives of the birth of Jesus. Matthew 2 Verse 1 tells us that Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea in the days of Herod the king. It very specifically calls him the king. He has descendants. Herod Antipas, who was known as Herod in the Gospels, we know him as Herod, was Herod the Tetrarch, a different title. And you can see the title is correct. Matthew knows about the titles. There's a coin of Herod the Great. If you read it there, it says Herodu Basileos, Herod the king. He put that on his coin. He was very proud of that title. Matthew is showing great knowledge of the way that the province, or what you want to call it, the kingdom, was working at that time. Here's the account from Luke, and it tells us that there was a census. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus, all the world shall be registered. All the world's a way of referring to the Roman Empire, and he says it's the registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and if we have everybody going to be registered in their own town. So there's a movement of people back to the places where they are going to register for tax. And among those, we have Joseph going to Bethlehem because that's where he belonged. That's his family home. And the skeptics say that just doesn't fit the way that censuses were carried out. The objections. First of all, let's say, well, we haven't got a record of this census. We have census records from the Roman Empire, but there's no record of this census. In any case, Herod's kingdom was outside the Roman Empire, they say. Herod was a client king, so that's something wrong with it as well, isn't it? Why would he have a census? There's the comment that Roman censuses didn't require people to go back to their ancestral lands. If you had to go back to where your ancestors were 1,000 years earlier, that would have meant people moving all over the Roman Empire. That's what the skeptics say very much. They say, well, Mary was a woman, they wouldn't bother counting her. And in any case, Quirinius is 10 years after the death of Herod the Great. Well, some of those objections have something behind them. Most of them have nothing at all. Let's have a think about it. Well, the first point is they're making an assumption that the census that is being talked about here in Luke is the same as a modern census. In a modern census, the government says on a certain time, a certain date, midnight on the 1st of January, or whatever it happens to be, everybody will fill in a form, we'll collect them in, and we'll know exactly what the picture of what was going on at that time. That isn't how Roman censuses worked. It didn't work like that. At least the provincial censuses didn't. What's happened is that Augustus has sent out a decree. Every province has got to have a census. He doesn't say on the same day. He says we've got to know how many people there are in that province, and we've got to keep on knowing that. So there we are. That's the Empire of Augustus again. And Augustus decrees that every province must have a census. There must be a census in that province, and that's recorded for us. It's recorded in the Res Gestae Augusti, which inscription appears all over the place. It's something that Augustus composed to record the achievements of his reign, and he records that he arranged for the proper government of provinces, and he talks about census. And then that's filled out a bit more by the Roman historian Cassius Dio, who talks about the way that Augustus arranged for censuses in every province. And the census had two main purposes. First of all, it allowed the Roman emperor to work out how to get resources from that province. He could tax them properly, and he could provide them with the resources they needed in order to be governed properly. If you use a big province, you get more tax, but he also may need to send out more soldiers to control it. But he had another purpose as well, and that was to show the people who lived in that province that Rome was in control. The census said, we know where you live, we know who you are, we even know who your family are, so be good. It was a way of controlling the population. And Herod the Great, who was not a nice man, would not want to miss out on that. He would want to have that kind of influence over the people in his area. So the whole of the Roman Empire is arranging a census. Herod is arranging a census as well, because his ideas fit in really nicely with this part of Roman rule. Records of censuses. Well, we have records. We have records from Egypt. Certainly, we have huge numbers of records. That's a part of a census record. It's a return. We have enough of these to even follow individual families through from one census to another and see how they developed, where they moved, how the family grew, who was born, who died, and so on. But census records were kept on papyrus. They only survive in dry places. So they survive in some bits of Egypt, away from the Nile, where it's nice and dry. They survive in Arabia. We don't have any detailed census records from any other provinces, and Palestine would simply be too wet for the census records to have survived to the modern day. We also have an order. It's on Papyrus again, but it's an order which was sent out all over the place to tell people what they should do for the census. And it's from the prefect of Egypt, who's called Gaius Vibius Maximus. That's one of the more senior administrators in the province. And the interesting thing about it, it's only part of it translated there, is that he says, anybody who is outside their nome, that was the Egyptian name for like a county or a sort of sub-province, their area, if they're outside your area, then they have to go back home in order to be counted. And further on in the document, he gives information as to how you can go and register somewhere else. If you move permanently to a city, he says, go to the, and then he names people, and they will register you in the new place. So what's happened here is that Joseph, in his registration, he hasn't registered in Nazareth. He's got to decide, am I going to stay in Nazareth with Mary, or are we going to go and live in Bethlehem? And it seems he decided they were going to go back to Bethlehem, and that's where they're going to live, because that was his ancestral home. That's where he wants to raise a family. And because Jesus is the son of David, it's an important thing that he should be brought up in the city of David. So you can see why he would want to move back to Bethlehem. So that's where he's registered anyway, and that's where he's going back. Some critics say, oh, well, this only counts about, it's not really talking about everybody, it's talking about itinerant craftsmen. Well, of course, Joseph was a carpenter who traveled somewhere else. He counts exactly as an itinerant craftsman, so there's no problem with that. Let's go back to the account in the Gospel of Luke. So what's going on? Well, first of all, the decree goes out from Caesar Augustus. Augustus has reformed it. He's put out a decree and says every province should have a census. Joseph's from Bethlehem, so they go back to Bethlehem. And Joseph has chosen that's going to be the place he's going to raise his family. So he's going to be registered there rather than in Nazareth, or maybe in Papyrus, it's city nearest to Nazareth. He's probably decided to raise his family there, and once he's got there with a wife who's expecting a baby, he's going to be very difficult to get it back again. It's also going to be difficult once the baby's born until it's got a bit older. So they travel down to Bethlehem to register. He takes Mary with him because later on it's going to be much harder. We don't know how long before the census it was that Joseph arrives in Bethlehem, but that's where they are when Jesus was born. The chronology of it, the birth of Jesus doesn't quite fit the time when Quirinius is governor of Syria. And the skeptics complain about that. They say, notice there's a gap about 10 years, maybe a little more, between the birth of Jesus and the time when Quirinius is governor of Syria. Remember, Jesus was born before the death of Herod the Great, possibly quite some time before the death of Herod the Great, and Quirinius isn't governor until 10 years after Herod dies, or maybe 7 years after Herod died, depends on when you think Herod died. So there's this gap, and the critics make a tremendous amount of it. Well, it's not quite so simple. We're thinking of a modern census. Modern census is something that happens in a particular day and then data is all processed. But a Roman census took time to arrange. It took a long time to arrange it. So we know about Egypt. We know how long their first census took. It took them 10 years. Well, Egypt was a country which had censuses before the Romans took over. It was run by the Ptolemies, and the Ptolemies ran a system of censuses. So it wouldn't be that difficult for them to arrange a Roman census instead. But even so, it took them 10 years from their first registration to the census being completed. In Gaul, we have the record. It took 40 years from Augustus telling them that they needed to have a census to the first returns being completed. People would start registering straight away, and they would have to keep on re-registering, and there'd be counts and subcounts and corrections and all the rest of it. It took 40 years to get it all organized. So the idea that it's organized starts off at the end of the reign of Herod the Great and finishes during the governorship of Quirinius is not a problem. The census under Quirinius is fairly famous. It's in Josephus. There were riots and all the rest of it. But the point about it is that it's not a long time for a Roman census. And so that objection rather disappears when you look at the history of other censuses. Read Dio Cassio about it. Now, we've had a look at it so far. We made a good case for the historicity of the Gospels. Let us know. There's more to come, but write in the comments. Tell us what you think of what you've heard so far. So that's the kingdom of Herod the Great. That's the bit he ruled, quite a large amount of territory. The Romans allowed him to do it. When Herod died, well, he left it to Herod Antipas, but when Herod Antipas went to Rome to have his rulership confirmed, was of course a client king, Archelaus turned up with another will that he said that Herod the Great had dictated on his deathbed, and Archelaus had written down for him, and here it was, and it divided the area into three, and Archelaus got the big bit. Some doubt whether it was authentic or not, but the Romans accepted it, and the kingdom broke up into three sections. Archelaus got the bit in purple. Herod Antipas, another son of Herod the Great, got the green bits, got Galilee, and he got Perea, and another one of Herod the Great's sons, called Philip, got bits to the northeast of that. When Jesus, or when the family with Jesus in, return from Egypt, they find that Archelaus is in control. Now, Archelaus was cruel. Herod the Great was cruel, but Archelaus was worse. And they didn't want to live in a country that's governed by Archelaus. And so they move on to Nazareth. There's Nazareth, just over the border, nicely in the kingdom of Herod Antipas, somewhat safer than being in the place where Archelaus lived. And again, it fits very nicely into the history of the time that we have this problem with Archelaus and them going to live in Nazareth. It gives a good reason for it. Nazareth is over the border. It's where Mary came from, and it's ruled by a different ruler. So what have we seen? First of all, we've seen that the gospel accounts of the birth of Jesus give an exact reflection of the historical situation of the time of Jesus' birth. They fit very nicely. The detail is good. We also can see that you don't really need to go outside. We can go outside and see that the history in the Gospels matches the reality. Well, the Gospels are the reality. But we don't need to do that. We can just read the Gospels, and the Gospels contain all the history in them that we need to know. And finally, the important thing is not to impose anachronistic ideas when we're studying the Gospels. If you study the Gospels, don't imagine that what's in them is the same as what's in the modern world. It's quite often quite different. So, hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you found it informative. If you did, then press the like button and see if you want to subscribe to the channel, and you'll see more videos of the same kind of thing. Let us know what you thought of it in the comments below, should I say, the comment section. And of course, every week usually we put out another video on a topic like this one, either what the Bible teaches or why you can trust it. So subscribe and take a look at our website. That's the address on the video there for more information. And may God bless you always.